Thanks for joining us. This is Mark and Keely.
Yes, hello.
And we have somebody else joining us to host today who you won't have heard on this podcast before.
It's exciting. It's the one, it's the only, Mr. Tony Nero.
Hooray! Hey, Tony.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks a lot.
Oh,
Thanks
you're
for
very
inviting me.
welcome. We've talked in the past about if there was a Mount Rushmore for artists in Peterborough that have had an impact in the city.
Yeah,
You would definitely, in both of our minds, be one of those four artists.
absolutely.
Cheers,
Just
guys.
all four. It'd be Tony. Just all different portraits.
The different, one with a paintbrush, one with a camera.
One with a cheese sandwich.
Spray cans now as well.
And spray cans. I mean, come on.
We have seen Tony at so many of our events, and he's so supportive of what we do as writers. You wouldn't class yourself as a writer, as an artist, but Tony does photography, painting. I mean, Tony, do you want to introduce yourself?
Usually when I'm tutoring and they ask me, what do I do? What's my favourite medium? And I just say, well, I work in charcoals, oils, acrylics, watercolours, pencils, you name it, I'll do it. But yeah, I work in a lot of different mediums.
Do you remember the first time we met? It was when I was Peterborough Poet Laureate. Did you see what I did there? The year after Mark.
Yeah.
It was anyway. And you had a exhibition in Peterborough, and you invited a few of the poets to come down and perform. And that was so great, because that was really the beginning of like cross collaboration. I felt like where artists would go to poetry gigs and vice versa, like to exhibitions.
I think that was my second solo exhibition here in Peterborough. And so it might have been about 2009 or something like that.
Yeah, it was 2010, 2009.
Yeah, and it was like having the opportunity to invite you guys down to add a different bit of flavour to the exhibition. For me, that was absolutely brilliant.
You've been great at collaborating, Tony, and we're so pleased that you're here with us on this.
Yeah, just to
this
get
series.
a different slant, and also to see if there's any similarities between like your art form and poetry, I think.
I think there is, because as a creative person, regardless whether you're doing music or poetry or art, you know, some things cross over. Some of the way you work, some of the way, the mindset, you know, it crosses over with each other.
So you're always at like every event, Tony.
Yeah.
You appear at like every event, taking pictures and taking. Why do you attend so many different things?
Are you being paid? Are you independently?
Because you're the photographer laureate.
So I've always been interested in photography, always had a camera. So I started documenting my exhibitions, right? And then while I was doing that, I kept hearing people saying, there isn't an art scene in Peterborough. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've just been to an open mic. I've just been to a poetry night. There's an art exhibition. So then I started documenting the creative scene, you know, the open mics, the poetry nights. I felt as if I had a bit of a duty to say to people, well, look, we are doing stuff here in Peterborough. So then I started documenting those things. And you guys were doing a poetry event. And then as usual, I rocked up. And I can't remember, I think it was either you or Pete said, hey, you know, Tony, the unofficial photographer laureate.
Yeah, and that's it.
So it was the poets who named me. And the ET picked it up. And they said to me, what's this I hear that you're photographer laureate? And I just laughed it off and I said, yeah, it's the poets. You got to blame the poets. And so they published it in the article. And then ever since, that was it. It stuck with me.
Wow.
Can't get rid of the title.
Tony, like, we're so pleased to have you here.
And we get to see Harry.
Yeah. So we got Harry Baker coming to join us
we
today.
got Harry coming. Yeah.
Yeah, which is amazing because he's super busy right now on his tour, which is going so well. Keely and I have seen Harry before, but Harry performed at my wedding. We go back a long way. So I'm super excited to see Harry again, and also to celebrate in a way like how well his engine is running as a freelance artist.
Yeah, I think also I've seen lots of different changes in Harry's career as well.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to know where he's at now. I think that's really exciting.
And maybe you haven't heard the name Harry Baker. Like, you probably have. And perhaps you know him because of the TED Talk. It was so huge. Perhaps you know him because of his work with Harry and Chris, his good friend Chris, who's a jazz musician, working together with their comedy double act performance. Or perhaps from the rap battling that he's done, or from World Slam Champion as well.
I know. I can't do slams. I admire anyone that can do battling or slams. Yeah. You are amazing. I just... Oof.
Yeah. What are you looking forward to about the chat?
One of the questions I'd love to ask him is, how do you guys sort of remember some of the poems, those words that you write? I remember as a kid growing up doing poetry, and back in the Caribbean, we call it recitation. Yeah. So you'd recite, and if you'd forgotten your words, and you'd call it like you burst. Yeah. And that would be the worst thing you could ever do, because all the other kids would be laughing at you and you'll never live it down. So when I listen to you guys sometimes and how you guys recite those poems, sometimes I wonder if there's any little knack that you use to help you to remember some of those words.
Well, let's ask him for now.
Oh, yeah. Haven't we got a poem to ease ourselves in?
Yes, we do have a piece. We had a workshop with Georgia Priest. Georgia was getting people to write about kind of manifestos about living.
And we've got a really amazing, beautiful poem coming up from a gorgeous person called Beccy Golding, and it's titled Manifesto.
I am Beccy Golding. I exist in a time when peace is hard to keep, when powerful people lose their humanity, where there is too much traffic. But also there are sunrises and sunsets, mountains, views, bird song and murmurations, the tide, still pools, clouds, rainbows, roast potatoes, bao buns, family, children laughing, lullabies, stories, campfires, rum, ginger beer, notebooks, pens, a warm breeze, the sound of a fish plopping in water, cats, theatres, humanity, humanism, community, beauty in small things, the unlikelihood of it all. I call upon the activists and whistleblowers, my son, my mentor, my town niece and my country niece, my grandmother, Polystyrene, Ros Martin, Monty Don, Annie Lennox, Kate Bush, Cyndi Lauper, the people who pulled down the Colston statue, Bertel Martin, Selena Godden, Nikita Gill, Michael Rosen, Rosie Jones, Richard Jones, Chrissy Hind, Grandma Moses, Van Gogh, Lowry, Bruegel, Bridget Riley, Benjamin Zephaniah, Audre Lorde and Jackie Kay. To burn down war, armaments, arms dealers and arms factories, people shamers, domestic abusers, incels, bigots, misogynists, victim blamers, high-rise buildings, corrupt politicians, Nestle, frackers, sweatshop owners, slave traders, pain, injustice, disease, road rage, poverty, admin, work, burnout, capitalism, empty offices, empty homes, roadworks and barking dogs. And instead, to build food growing spaces, community, a fair wage, free public transport, the chance to travel, time for green travel, safe, respectful homes for old people, respect for creativity, respect for diversity and individuality, respect for homogeneity, safe streets at night, safe parks, safety to walk in the countryside alone, all the medicines and treatments that people need, VIP spaces and services for everyone because everyone is a VIP, respect for carers and dirty jobs, because most people are kind, because nature will heal itself, because there are many people doing what they can to make things better in many ways. I promise to breathe and move every day. I promise to spend more time in the real world. I promise to talk to myself as I would talk to a friend, to remember compassion. I promise to play, in the hope that my friends and family will flourish, in the hope of blue skies, fluffy clouds and astonishing sunsets, in the hope of gatherings with raucous laughter, tears, knees and shoulders touching, in the hope of peace, of peace, of peace. I am Beccy Golding. This is my manifesto, in the hope of peace.
Thank you so much to Beccy Golding for that fantastic manifesto that's got us all kind of excited. We are excited because we've got Harry Baker with us right now.
Yay!
Good to see you, man.
Harry, thanks so much for joining us mid-tour.
You're very welcome.
How has it been?
Yeah, I think I'm bang on halfway through. But because I've organised it all myself, I'm basically doing Wednesdays and Thursdays, then home for the weekend to reset, then out again. So It means that the tour lasts about 3 months, but also it means that I'm not completely burning out. That way it then feels like I'm excited about every gig and buzzing rather than just sort of running on fumes by the end of it.
What's been the best moment of the tour so far, do you think?
I think the most surprising one was I had 2 gigs back to back in Margate. And so that's home crowds, especially the second one, all of my mates are there.
Yeah.
It's really, really special. And then the next day I had a gig in Southampton and it was just better than the Margate ones. And I don't know what it was. Sometimes it's just in the room, people are there and into it. And there was a poet there called Grace who had come to the first Something Borrowed that I did in Margate as a live event. They'd come from Southampton to do an open mic because they loved my work and wanted to be a part of it. And they absolutely smashed it. So then going back that way, I got them to do a little 5-minute at the start. So that was euphoric. What I love about tour is meeting people in different places and hearing how they came across you, and whether it's people who have followed you for 10 years or been dragged along reluctantly by their other half. I think there's something kind of magic about having all of that in the same space.
Yeah. And how it builds up over time, right? Because how many tours have you been on now?
So this is the 3rd solo tour I've done. And the first one started in February 2020. So I had a month of it, and then COVID hit. And then we very optimistically rescheduled it for a few months later, thinking it'll all have blown over by then. So that was years of can we? And then getting to the point where I was doing those gigs and thinking it's going to be euphoric, it's going to mean as much to everyone else as it does to me to be back in this space. And actually, those gigs were so anticlimactic because people weren't comfortable in those spaces. It was social distancing, it was wearing masks, it was also finishing the gig and not getting to chat to people afterwards, but just sort of going back to a green room by yourself. And it's even more isolating than doing it to a laptop in a weird way.
Yeah.
And I by that point, I started to believe it would never come back. So my last tour was then so cathartic to have done Edinburgh Fringe again and for it to have been vibey, and then actually to have toured around and remembered what it's like. So, I mean, this one feels like that was the starting point. So it's almost just on another level again. But yeah, I'm loving it.
Do you think there's been a change in the audiences since COVID in any respect?
I don't know if this is the change in me or in the audience, but I think I used to feel like I had to grab people from the start. And I think that comes from that background of doing those poetry slams, and you've got 3 minutes and you have to just get people, or performing at a festival, people can get up and leave at any point. So you've got to have your big hitters. And that comes from a sense of feeling like most people don't like poetry. So you have to either trick them into being in the room in the first place, or you have to show them that it's poetry, but it's worth your time. Yeah. And so you're almost apologising before you've begun. Whereas I think it's partly I'm more comfortable in who I am and what I'm doing now. But also I think the difference is with the tour show is that people are there to see me. Yeah. And so I've got permission to do my thing and be that whole spectrum of comedy and serious and heartfelt and all of that, and actually feel like they're with you. And if they're willing to sit and listen to you for 45 minutes, by the end of it, they're going to be on board with that. That feels the difference. Because the first tour I did, I'd done that show in Edinburgh and I put it under comedy because I was doing a lot of Harry and Christoph at the time. And also I thought, when I go to Edinburgh, even though I am a poet and I love poetry, the first thing I look for is the comedy. And so that show, the first 20 minutes of it, I wrote all of the in-between bits as if it was stand-up, thinking I have to get enough laughs here to justify calling it comedy. And then once everyone's on board, I'm allowed to make them cry. I used to kind of think, you want as many people in as possible with as low expectations as possible. Whereas now I feel much more comfortable doing that whole range. And it's not really labelled as spoken word or comedy or theatre. It's just a Harry Baker show.
And also the slam format is very important, I suppose, to you starting out.
Yeah, that's how I got started. And initially, I think my poems just happened to fit well with the format. And they were about 3 minutes long and they wrapped up quite neatly and they were self-contained. So you perform and then people give you a score out of 10 and there was no context needed. It was like, here's a love poem. It's got some dinosaurs in it. I've got a poem called The Sunshine Kid, which I like named my first book after. And it's one of the first times I've had a genuine, like, heartfelt personal story about friendship. And I performed it at a slam and it didn't do very well. And I thought, oh, that's a shame. This poem's rubbish. I thought it was good. But actually, it's just that it doesn't fit that format.
Yeah.
And that poem I still went on to do at the end of that first TED Talk that then got shared massively. And people have got in touch and said that it's meant a lot to them. And so it's just understanding what poems work in those different formats. And again, I think that's what I enjoy about doing the longer show, is that you get to play about with all of those different things. We've talked before about specific writing constraints and like whether that's like a univocalism or an equivalent. But I think writing for a slam is its own constraint because you've got 3 minutes, or writing something that's going to go online. Actually, people's attention spans are even shorter than that. So it's working out, is this going to work in 90 seconds? Or thinking about, I'm performing this at a school and in front of students who don't want to be there. It needs to have something that gets their attention early on to make them listen.
Do you ever have a moment where you feel like you've made that kind of hit record? This is my Britney Spears toxic moment. No, I'm really joking.
I remember there was an interview with Kanye West where he said he was on an escalator and he thought of the line, the one that's like, she's got a light-skinned friend looks like Michael Jackson, got a dark-skinned friend looks like Michael Jackson. Yeah. And when he thought of that line, he said, I know that I'm going to be massive. And I would say I have that moment like multiple times a day, and it never is true. Just because like I get so excited about any like neat bit of work and punchline, and it's never like the ones that you think that necessarily connect with people. I remember when I did the World like Poetry Slam final, you got to do 3 poems, and I'd just written Paper People at the time, and I'd done Dinosaur Love in the first round, and it had done well, and I knew that it would because it had like the dinosaur noise in it. Yeah. And I chose in the second round to do this Sunshine Kid poem that previously hadn't done well in slams, but I thought, this is my favourite poem right now, I want to do it. And when that did well enough to keep me in the lead, I knew that Paper People would like bring it home, because I knew that that was perfect for that moment.
The line I loved in that was where you talk about Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, Jack the Paper Ripper.
The Paper Ripper. Yeah. I thought that was...
It's really interesting. I've started performing that poem recently. For ages I didn't do it because I just felt like it's had its time and I've got these other poems now. But when they called the general election, I went over it and I wrote that the first time I was able to vote. And it was at the time... coalition government, or like student fees were going up, even though the Lib Dems said that they weren't going to do that.
Plus purple's like the colour of UKIP, which you're a big supporter of.
Well, exactly. That's what I've come on here to say.
I think you find it's now turquoise and it's reform. I think you find.
Poetry needs to reform. No, and I think, but it was about like protest being curtailed, and it, even in it, I mentioned Palestine because at the time I was just starting to be aware of that. And it was just after the banking crisis and feeling like the rich are getting richer. And so like all of this stuff still feels really relevant. And so I started performing the poem, but there's a couple of references that date it so much. And one is referencing like Pippa Middleton, which was a massive deal at the time. It just had this royal wedding.
I still got it. I still get it.
And, you know, one's like, Jack the Ripper are actually more timeless because they were already historical. There's a temptation to, I think, to go back and edit your poems so that they still feel relevant. When is the poem finished? Is it when you finish writing it, or is it the moment that it's shared with people?
Is the poem finished when you take it out to audiences, or are you still kind of writing and editing the poem? Does a tour ever help you finish the poem sometimes as you're touring?
Yes, and I think that's come from hanging around with comedians who try their material out and then hone it based on how it goes. And I think some of my poems are so meticulous and crafted that actually, by the time I finish writing it, there's not much wiggle room. But I've got a few poems more recently that are more like these kind of list poems of things that bring me joy or things I've learned from going interrailing that actually I've tried out a couple of times and a line doesn't work and you can just take it out. So I think what was interesting was when lockdown hit, I was writing these poems and I finished them and I could no longer use an audience to tell me if it was finished or not, or if it worked or not. And so I learned to trust my own judgment on that. And so I had to believe in what I was writing. I think actually, no matter what anyone else thinks of this in this moment, this is what I want the poem to be. And so I began to trust my writing more. And so it's interesting now coming back to playing around with an audience. Also, the risk in that time was like Grace was the only person I was sharing them to. And that's a lot of pressure to put on her. To be like, if she doesn't say, oh, that's lovely, dear, in the right time. It's a disaster.
Lucy hates hearing my poems when I'm working on it.
Yeah, my partner, bless him.
I used to never show her anything until it was finished, until it felt safe, because I knew where it was going. So the first time you do it, it might be that it's magic and there's that rawness to it because it is being shared for the first time. But often it won't be until you've done it a few more times or learnt to introduce it in a certain way or move this line around.
I find it interesting because it's the same sort of struggle that we have as artists. You know, where do you say that it's finished? Where do you sign it off? As you said about when you show it to the public, that's when you sort of say, yeah, it's finished. I find that I sort of go through that same thing.
Have you ever gone back and fixed up a painting
which
afterwards?
Is exactly like what you were saying. I've been working on a painting recently for like 6 years because I kept going back to it and was never happy with it. And then I actually got to that point where I took a bit of sandpaper to it and I started to scrub it off because I thought, you know, I'm just going to paint over it. And then when I started to sand it down, I fell in love with it again. So now the painting is half rubbed off, but I love it.
Well, Harry, would it be right to share a poem with us now?
Yes, I think in terms of not
needing,
in terms of not needing every poem to do everything, where it feels like it used to in a slam, this one just came out and felt right, and it's called Sunflowers, and it is just instructions upon my death. Ideally, I would like 100 benches, every single one of them facing the sea. If that's too much faff, I'd settle for the one somewhere in Margate, somewhere you can come and sit and think and be. And I don't need a fancy pot to keep my ashes. Just find a decent spot where there's a breeze. So the next time someone gasps at all the wonder in the world, a part of them is breathing in a part of me. And at my funeral, I'd like there to be sunflowers, a truly inconvenient amount. For I too will have spent a lifetime searching for the light, and I don't see a reason why that should stop now. Where what you want, if it were me, I'd go for trainers or wellies. Something comfortable and colourful to match. For as it was foretold by the prophet Jamie Tart, dress shoes are for muggles and for twats. For the reading, I'd like Erin's poem about final moments. Maybe this poem should be read for context too. And for the music, nothing short of a full-throated sing-along of my favourite song, Dynamite by Teo Grist. For the food, just make it veggie. For the drinks, serve up Negronis. If I pretend to like them, you can do the same. And for the wake, if people want to chat, then I am all for that. But just in case, make sure a corner's stacked with games. And don't let anyone apologise for crying. It is honestly my favourite thing to do. Just make sure everybody knows how much I loved being alive. The only thing that I loved more was loving you. Speaking of which, if you are free, then I would love for you. But if you can't, because you're dead, that's not your fault. To be honest, neither of us quite makes sense without the other. I still think we'll die together like a cult. And if anybody says I have gone to a better place, that is a kind and very well-intentioned lie. For there can be no better place than in a room with all my friends. Just promise we'll do this again the other side. Side note, let's also do this loads before we die. And by the time it comes around, maybe I'd hate it. I'll live for ages and these tastes will change with time. But one thing that I know that I will always find amazing is what a thing it is to live a life. P.S. Let's also do this loads before we die.
Great.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Harry. That was wicked. What did Grace make of that?
She liked that one. I wrote that after going to 2 funerals of 2 of her grandparents in quite a quick succession. And it was partly seeing people who'd known them for their whole lives and hearing about all the different kinds of persons that they were. And like I came away from it, and the first thing I said to Grace is something along the lines of like, what a thing it is to live a life. Not thinking this would go in a poem at some point, but that was the like overriding feeling from it of like flipping heck. They've done so much and been loved by so many people, and I only got to see a fraction of that. And how can you do that? But it's interesting talking about the show and performing that, because I used to like try and intro that poem and it felt really clunky, and actually now I just do it without. That feels like one of the poems where it says everything within it, and when I've tried to give it context beforehand, it's just a weird thing to do, to write a poem about your own death. And like there's no way of teeing it up that adds to it in any way. It just,
you don't want to give that pocket for people to start, you just go straight in.
Whereas like that one was the first one that like did really well on TikTok, because again, straight off the bat, people are hooked in it and they're not expecting to be thinking about death as they're scrolling through or whatever. But I've had people since tell me they've used it at funerals of people that they've known.
Wow.
And I kind of think, I wonder if they've used all of it, because some of it's really specific to me. And like a lot of the sentiment, I think I can understand. And like I've got love poems that, well, I did Dinosaur Love at your wedding.
Yeah, you did Dinosaur Love at our wedding.
I've got another poem, Dust, that lots of people have said that they've used. And that makes more sense to me. Whereas I think I would love for everyone to do their own version of it, where they have their own favourite song or whatever, and you can kind of almost move it about that way.
So, Harry, we're really looking forward to the show tonight. So Harry's going to be performing at Stanford Arts Centre, and it's amazing. It's sold out.
Yeah.
And a lot of the dates on the tour have sold out so far.
Yeah.
An awful lot of them have. And for me, I think that's kind of interesting, because I saw you in Stanford 2 years ago, maybe?
No, it would have been...
Was it longer?
I think so. Was it with Chris?
No, it was solo. You were over on your own.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, it was.
Do you remember the gig?
Yeah. I do remember the gig. Okay. Oh, yeah, this compared to that.
Yeah.
I was thinking, the one with Chris wasn't that bad, was it? But yeah, no, this one was quiet.
So we chat in between the sections about what we might talk about.
Yeah.
So I always said, like, So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because at the moment, Harry, you're doing so well. Like, it's really, really exciting to see. You're selling out at Stanford, and the last time I saw you in Stanford, it was like in a side room, like a bar space, which is like not unusual. Like, we do all these gigs, but I mean, it wasn't a big audience, right? It was pretty small. Yeah. You smashed this set and you came off, and we had a lovely night. But from where that was then to where it is now, that's a huge achievement to be coming back and selling out the theatre space at the Arts Centre. And so I guess, what do you think has changed in that time? I mean, you were with Avalon back then, right? You were with an agency.
Yes, so I think that was part of the first solo tour I'd done. So me and Chris had performed up at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and I think it's because Rob Orton, amazing poet, was signed up by this stand-up comedy agency. Yeah. And so they saw us and sort of courted us to kind of sign us. We had no idea what that was, but it sounded exciting. And part of that was they are like Russell Howard's agent. So they'd brought him along to our show in Edinburgh. And this is when we're doing Free Fringe. We put out a little cardboard sign saying, reserved for Russell Howard. And on that day, he had to do something else. So people thought it was like a reference that was going to be part of a joke in the show. And it was just us being like, no, we really thought he would come and he's busy. And so we did a couple of tours with them. And actually, that was the best part about that relationship, was getting to go all around the country, doing what we love. And at that point, it's doing it with Chris, who's my best mate. And we're just like...
And they've got marketing teams. You're getting billboard space and stuff like that.
And they've got a lot of weight behind their name because of their other acts. So I think, looking back on it, wherever it was in Shrewsbury, were happy to book us because they thought they would get Al Murray the following month. And we were being booked into these massive rooms. And that's an interesting thing as well, because we were like selling 100 tickets in a 400-seater space, and then it feels a bit kind of empty. Ooh. And so that's then an interesting thing about when it came to me booking my own tours. I was thinking, actually, I'm going to be much more tactical with it. Start off by going to the places like Bristol, where I was at uni, or London, where I lived for ages, or, you know, now I'm down in Margate. That's always going to be that kind of home crowd. Whatever the sizes, I'd rather play in a full room. So it's picking the 50-seater theatre or the 90-seater. And what's interesting now is filling up those bigger spaces.
You chose to leave Avalon.
Yeah.
Were you nervous about the move or excited about the move?
I think, if I'm being honest, I was relieved, because at that point it was such a bad working relationship. And I think that's because I came from a background of doing everything myself. So I was used to like doing whole fringe runners by myself on the free fringe, but like shaking a bucket at the end and like sleeping on my mate's floor, but like doing well out of it. Whereas they were coming in being like, no one makes money off the fringe. Any money you would make, you've got to put back into advertising so that people notice you, so that you get on TV, so that in 10 years' time you can take a break. And I was there with the like lived different experience, saying, I've come to the fringe and I've made money before. And also, like, this is my job. I'm a full-time poet and I make my living from doing gigs. So them saying like, me and Chris basically had to start again in comedy world and travel halfway across the country to do a like mixed bill slot for 50 quid between us. I couldn't afford to do that. And I think that is why when I see conversations about there not being enough working class people in comedy, it's because there's people who don't need to make a living off it. They can afford to like throw loads of money into it and see how it goes. And that wasn't the reality for us. And also, like, they weren't interested in the poetry gigs, even though they were the ones that, one, I was making money from, and two, was where I had this like core audience who wanted to see me.
I think that's really interesting. So, maybe the reason why you're selling out now and you're doing so well is because if you've got an organisation like that, they're marketing loads of different people, so they're not centering in on one thing. Like, but because you've done this before, you know how to market yourself.
Plus, you don't need the middleman as much with social media now. Like you have a way to directly connect with your audience that wasn't as straightforward before. I always thought that was a great thing about rap battling, was that, that you could circumvent the entire music industry to an extent as an MC and connect straight directly with the audience by going through that route.
Can I just say one thing? I just want to like high five you. I nearly dropped something and threw something when you talked about working class, like being prohibited from being able to take part in stuff. Because of that, I wanted to high five you. So I just need to say that. And like
even me saying like I could come away from the fringe having made money, that's because I could stay in a friend's spare room. So that's already like £1,000, 2,000, like that. Those costs are just going up and up. So for me, I could on my student loan go up to the fringe and try it out and like dedicate my summer to that, and it not having to like completely sell out for me to break even. But yeah, so go back to your question. When I left Avalon and I was putting this, so my second solo tour, but like first one I was doing myself, part of me thought, am I going to find out that they were doing loads of stuff behind the scenes that I didn't appreciate and no one's going to be there?
Yeah.
And it turns out that was not true. It was just like, they would put like 50 quid behind a Facebook advert.
Right, yeah.
But they would like ask you for that 50 quid and then take a 15% commission on it. It didn't work for me. And that was as much about, I have a clear vision of what I want to do and what I want to say. And for the first 5 or so years of my career, the question was, can I make a living out of being a poet? And then at some point that switched to being like, okay, if I can make a living out of being a poet, what is it that I want to say and do? I'm in an incredibly rare position where I don't have to do every gig anymore. And so that's no longer the excuse of I've got to do all of this. I've got to absolutely cane it. And this is part of the like tension with Avalon as well, was me saying like, I don't really want to gig on weekends. And they did not understand that because like they're full of really hungry comedians who are desperate to like make it. And they had one way of doing things. And it worked for some of their acts. And so they were very dismissive of anything that wasn't that. Whereas I think if you go into that just sort of chipping away at your own personal boundaries and whatever and thinking at some point I'll be able to like hold that line, then that's never going to happen. Whereas I think I would rather have that integrity and do it in the way that I want to do it now so that like 5 years down the line, now that I am selling out these venues, I'm still doing it on a Wednesday and a Thursday.
Yeah.
Because I want to be at home at the weekend, because I want to have friends and I want to have a life. And that it's presented as that's not an option. Yeah. And I think as poets, as artists, what we have in abundance is imagination, both for creating art, but also for seeing things to be different. And one thing that I was confused about for ages was, why does this big agency not want to subvert the system? And it's because they're built on it. Yeah. They have no interest in changing the way things are done. On that first tour I did by myself, it was just after the like Liz Truss mini budget had happened. And I suddenly had this moment of like, on my tour shows, there's like 5 to 10 comps held back until it sells out. And at that point, it wasn't selling out. So I just said, if anyone wants to come for free because they can't afford it, message me and I'll get you in. Like, I would rather there's people in the room than not. Yeah. And I put a thing about that online and people said, oh, that's amazing. You know what? I would happily like put some money for someone else to go to a show. So it became this like, I'd also just been watching Star Wars at the time. I was really into it. So it like became like the Resistance Fund. And basically there was about $2,000 worth of like donations from people that pretty much matched the number of people who could then come for free.
That's amazing.
And that was really just me not spending all my creative energy having to justify those decisions to someone who wasn't invested in them. Like, that's a win for everyone. People get to come who wouldn't otherwise come. People who don't even live somewhere the gig is but want to support it get to feel like they're a part of that community. I get more people in the room. Like, even, and I was doing it thinking, even if I lose money from this, it's worth it because there's people there. But actually, it balanced out anyway. And that is something that, one, I don't think Avalon would have gone for, but two, I wouldn't have even brought to them because it was within this framework of thinking.
Yeah, it's you're speaking a different language almost. It's
one of the like breaking points was we had done Edinburgh 4 years in a row, and the fourth year was our best show by far, and it was a good comedy show. Like, we'd learned how to do it, and we were getting lots of reviewers in, and it was all like 4 and 5 stars. And this was people like Chortle, who basically didn't like how upbeat we were. Like, they were very cynical, and they were writing reviews being like, these guys are undeniably good. Like, it's not really our thing, but they are like good at what they do. And the way that it worked is if you got more than 8 reviews, you could be like eligible for like best reviewed shows of the Fringe. And the way that it worked, we got 7 reviews. I think like they were maybe all 5-star. So if we had got a single 1-star review, on average, we would have been like the best show of the Fringe, would have had a run at Soho Theatre off the back of it. And we were saying to like Avalon, who at the time we had paid thousands of pounds to do our PR. Because that was the like, you know what, this time we're going to just go for it. And then that didn't happen. And they were just like, there's always next time. And I just remember thinking like, this was the time. And if we can't do it now, then like, when is it going to be? At that Edinburgh, I did a solo show, not through Avalon.
Oh, and it smashed.
And it
was there.
Sold out. The whole run. And I hadn't done a solo show for like 5 years or so. And we did our joint show in a slightly bigger venue. And in terms of ticket money, because again, I think like people don't talk about money. In terms of ticket money, my solo show, I got about, it was something like 20 grand in ticket sales that then after the venue split was about 12 grand. And I had brought on a producer, which I'd not done before.
Liz, right?
With Liz Council. And I think I paid her 3 grand. And then I got £9,000 from doing that show. And with Harry and Chris, we had a bigger room, but we had bought into this Avalon model that essentially all of their costs were just split between the different acts that were there with them. But that meant that because we were doing quite well, they were putting all their energy to promoting these other shows. And so with Liz, for my solo show, we paid 2 people £10 an hour for 1 hour before the show. And that helped bump it up enough. Whereas with this, with Avalon, me and Chris were paying for their flyers' hotel rooms because they'd brought them up from London.
And the flyers aren't massively invested in the show either.
They're not,
And so me and Chris were in this slightly bigger room. So I think we had like again, between 20 and 30 grand, like coming through the door.
Yeah.
And then there was like this blanket fee, and then there was the like cut, and then. And me and Chris got our final statement, and I think we got £140 each of 30,000.
Yeah. Well, it always seems to come down to the point that he goes, oh, it's not really any money there left.
And
it's
100%.
And you feel like whatever happened, we wouldn't be getting any money.
Yeah. So I had this conversation like with the agent, be like, I did this solo show and I sold it out by myself.
Yeah.
Without going in your model. We went in your model and we didn't even get the like one thing we were going for, which was this sort of like industry acceptance. And on the phone, I remember my agent saying, but you really want to be selling out 90-seater venues for the rest of your life? As if we had gone with them, if I'd also given them all of my solo money, maybe it would happen.
Yeah.
And I remember this light bulb moment of like, that sounds incredible. I would love that. Yes, please. Let's do 90-seater venues, and let's also be able to sleep at night and that kind of thing. Yeah. And I think what took me a while was to learn to unpick ambition equals bad, because they used to make it out like I didn't give a shit about my career because I didn't want to do it their way. Whereas I care about what I do more than anyone else. And so now I'm at this point where I am selling out bigger than 90-seater venues. I'm absolutely loving it, but mainly because I'm doing it in the way that feels right, in the way that feels like it is important. And even by Avalon's metric, it's more successful.
There must have been some challenges putting this tour together. And I was just wondering, this might be a crazy question, but as someone that we know loves maths, if you were to like break down the percentages of all the things that go in to make up a tour, that take your time and energy perhaps.
Okay, I'm going to break it down as I go and hope that it adds up to 100.
I love this.
But I would say the big thing that's changed for me is when me and Chris were doing stuff with Avalon, we were doing a show in Edinburgh every year.
Yeah.
And then touring it, and then having to come up with that new show for the next year. And the buzzword there was momentum. And it was just like, if you keep going at it, at some point it'll reach tipping point. And I think that's true to an extent. And I think part of the reason why there's a bigger audience in Stamford this time is because last time I came was the first time I'd come. But people who came will come back and do appreciate that kind of thing. But I think the big thing that changed for me was doing my last show because of COVID, because of lockdown. That was 3 years in the making in terms of the writing of it. And so I had a show that I was much prouder of. And so therefore I was willing to put in all of that work of organising the tour and putting it together. And off the back of that, I decided, roughly speaking, I would try and do a show every other year rather than every year, because there's enough time to write it and make it good. I think I need time when tour is done to sit, take a step back, write for the love of writing again. And I will only think about putting another tour or another book together once it's pretty much there. I cannot stress enough, I think the hardest work is making something that is worth touring, or that you're proud enough of to want to share with people, to being willing to like sit through all of the other stuff. So I think that's the kind of more intangible part. So then in terms of the actual, like, once you've got your show and want to do it, for me, it's then each time it gets easier because I've got this template from before. So now it's getting back in touch with venues that I've gone to before that it's gone well at, so they're willing to do it. And the way that I've done it is I will go to a venue and suggest that it's done on a ticket split, so that the more tickets we sell, the more money everybody gets from that. And then I put together what's called a tour pack, which again, the first time I contacted a venue and they asked for a tour pack, I Googled what it was and copied someone else's. Like, this is me learning as I go. Yeah. But that is you basically explaining to them why it's worth putting your show on. And that's one, saying that the show is really good, but two, saying that people will turn up. And that's either saying I've got this amount of following online, or I went to university nearby and I've got friends, and you know, that kind of thing. And so it's making it appealing to them to want to put you on. And that's much easier if you say, at my last tour, I was selling out 100-seater venues. And since then, I've got this many followers. And so now I think I can sell out 150-seater venues. But also I think it's being honest with yourself and not expecting that just because you put on a show somewhere, people are automatically going to come. Like, I think part of it is if the show sounds interesting, whether that's because of the subject matter or whether that's because people will know you and will want to come along because of that. Like, people aren't magically going to come to stuff. The only place that happens is the Edinburgh Fringe. And that's what I love about it. It's the only place I've been where I felt like people are up for just coming in off the street and not knowing what it will be, and then that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think part of the work is writing the show. Part of the work is making it appealing to the venues. And then it's getting in touch with the venues. And that, sometimes you never hear back, sometimes you do. And then it's a case of the logistics of trying to line up all of those dates and them to be vaguely geographically consistent.
That feels so stressful.
In my other job, I used to run a venue, and I used to get people approaching me, and you have to consider how you respond. And I think not responding is bad venues.
Yeah.
You should always respond.
I think most creative people as well, you just want to create. And I think what you're doing is really good, finding that balance where you give yourself space to create, and then you give yourself space to do your promotion and all that kind of stuff. Because there's a lot of artists who just can't deal with promoting and that side of things.
Can I just say, you are excellent at promoting and promotion.
Yeah. Tony's been getting pics all the way around. He's got his smash.
No, but you are.
You are
definitely.
good
And
at it,
people
yeah.
will follow you, so they know what's going on in the art world, which is amazing.
My last autumn, I didn't count it as a tour, but I put all of the gigs I was doing in one place because I think the nature of social media now is that people who have chosen to follow you don't necessarily see your stuff anymore. So it used to be that X number of people follow you, that's great. I'm thinking me announcing that I'm doing a gig in Manchester, that's going to be really good information for the people who follow me who live in Manchester, but they're not even going to see that. And what I find ridiculous is that it feels like TikTok is so huge now that Instagram has tried to copy it. And that model feels like, rather than showing your stuff to people who follow you, it's showing your stuff to a few random people. And then if they respond to it well, it will show it to more people, including your followers. So I no longer assume that someone watching my video knows who I am or is interested in what I have to say. But also the way that it values video content over pictures is for, like, previously I would have the whole tour poster, and then each month I would put up just an image of me with the dates from that month. And this time around, for whatever reason, it makes more sense for me to just read that out to the camera, because these apps want you to spend more time on the app, and they think that people are going to spend time watching a video rather than looking at an image. And that's partly about just making your peace with the way that the system is. But I think that's then interesting as well, because when me and Chris were doing our tour, we made loads of videos that were venue specific to each place. And when we were on tour, the only thing that we were putting out online was about our tour. Because we were like, this is the thing that we're doing right now. This is the most important thing. But of our 10,000 followers online, like over half of those aren't coming to our gigs or don't live in the UK or whatever.
Yeah.
And so actually anyone who's watching that is then sort of switching off. And so what I've found this time is that I have got this monthly night in Margate where I'm having 4 different poems filmed every month.
Yeah.
So that's not me putting more of my creative energy into making like fun, engaging videos. That's just me doing a gig and having this. And I've purposefully, when I'm putting these videos up, every other video is just a video of me doing a poem that isn't related to tour at all, because there's people who can't come to gigs or aren't interested. And then the next video is me saying, hey, there's still some tickets left in Birmingham if anyone's interested in that. And because you're kind of dipping in and out of it, it then means anyone who's just started following you because of this latest poem then finds out for the first time that you're on tour. Because it can feel like you're repeating yourself loads, but I think it's about it feeling interesting to people and engaging to people.
How long do you plan your social medias posts in advance? How long do you post them in advance?
In my head, It's video one day, picture the next day.
Yeah.
And then every other video is just me to camera, depending on ticket sales, where needs a bit of a boost.
Yeah.
And every other one is a video from this gig. And so far that's kind of got me through. But then every now and then I realise I've not got time to do it. Because that's like a good hour in the morning in terms of like captioning it and putting it up. And that feels worth it in this moment. But that's also the reason why I don't want to tour every year, because I don't want to spend all of my time worrying about that. And so I'm happy to put that work in now. And what's amazing is that you can see the impact on the tour because people are coming because they've seen me on TikTok. And that wasn't something I anticipated.
Okay.
Whereas there's also people there who are there because I performed in their school when they were a teenager 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And now they're in their 20s and they're there by choice. And that's so lovely.
Thanks everyone who's sending work into the series so far. If you have a poem you'd like to send us, please send it as a WAV file. Chris has got no time for MP3s these days. He is so... you should hear him go on about MP3s. We've got a poem we want to share with you now. It's been sent in to us by Aaron Isaac. If you want to send work in, by all means, send it to mark@wethepoets.com. We will listen to it and we'll kind of try and get it on the show. But this piece is called Planner. And we feel like it might fit in really well with what we're talking about right now.
Nothing gets you where you want to be like a good plan. And I am a planner. I love it. I'm always ready, even when the task gets heavy, because I'm more prepared than you. I write things down, even little things like pop into town, because I am a planner. Divided days into 15-minute sections. I write down all my lessons. I even describe the zeitgeist and note down the aroma, the essence. Planning senselessly. I plan to do the plan. My diary is in my diary. I divide the months in half and plan the plan in the first half. I'm a meta planner, self-referential, circular. I plan my way out of ruts the plan caused. I plan pauses into plan breaks when the plan breaks. And I always plan to fix it. I plan flans and cakes and biscuits. I plan my deadlines and I have a backup plan for when I definitely miss it. Because I am a planner. I plan my food even when the fridge is empty and I haven't eaten for 3 days. I plan exactly what time I'll run for the bus and what time it will drive off without me. I plan how loudly I'll be shouting and how flagrantly my arms will swing on a scale of nonchalance to vigorous. Oh yes, my plans are rigorous. Hell, I'm ready for the apocalypse. And I don't even mean the current trend of zombies with lip fillers. That's the apocalypse, that's different. I mean the real deal, the nukes. I've even picked out my suit and what flavour of crisps I'll be eating. I plan by the planets, by the zodiac wheel, the harvest, the seasons, the sun and the moon, and all the calendars, Gregorian, Tudorian, 32 days a month, the menstrual cycles across all time zones, because I am a planner. Sometimes, me and the plan are so intertwined, the plan plans for me. It seems to plan to be depressed for days and do fuck all. But who am I to question the plan? Because I am a planner.
Thank you so much to Aaron Isaac for that well-planned piece called The Planner. What did you guys think?
You can't, I don't know if you can hear it in the recording, but I'm grinning ear to ear. That really made me happy. But there's such a nice pacing that you're just sort of with it. And then when it kind of, it can hold that space. And there was a confidence to the delivery so that it can then deliver that punchline at the end.
Yeah.
And I just loved it.
What did you guys think? Did you enjoy it?
Well, I enjoyed it. I also loved the idea of making a plan not to make any plans at all. I just love that. Yeah.
I felt like I've been him several times. and I am that poem each and every day in so many different ways. That's the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, I also think the repetition is kind of quite comforting as well, quite funny and
I
sweet.
love repetition.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Aaron. That was a wicked piece. So we were talking before we had that break about your planning.
Yes, I think I've gone off on multiple tangents, but one thing I was going to say is I've had a couple of these big moments that have happened, and you can't plan for those, just to segue seamlessly from that poem. But what I think more than that is people who are with you along the ride anyway, and people you don't realise who saw you perform 7 years ago in that basement, and they've not followed you online since, but they see that you're coming nearby and then they come along again. Or someone has had your poem read at their wedding, which is obviously like a huge thing. You don't even sort of see that. So I think it is easy to get caught up in how many people are coming to my shows or how many people are seeing my stuff online. And when that's good, it's amazing and it does translate into people coming along. But I think that poetry has this long-standing impact. And I think part of the reason why more people are coming now is just because I've been doing it for a long time. Yeah. And I think I used to worry that I've written my best work and it's a shame that not as many people saw it as I hoped. Whereas now I'm beginning to believe that I'm going to keep writing and I'm going to keep doing this for years and years to come. And anyone who's seen me up until this point, if they've liked it, they'll be up for hearing more. And whatever the next thing is, you hope that then reaches more people and more people. But also it's about performing to who's in the room. So like that Stanford gig last time, if I'm being honest, I remember thinking, I wish Mark had come to one of the biggest shows because I wanted him to see that, like, I am doing it and I am loving it. And that felt more like kind of the old days of like performing in a pub and not being sure if people are going to be on board. But it was a lovely gig.
But those things are going to happen. Those gigs are still going to happen sometimes, right? Like they do happen for. We've all seen amazing poets performing with small audiences, but I guess it's that treadmill you put yourself on.
And in this current moment, it feels easier. And I'm not going to take that for granted in that I'm writing stuff that I love and people want to come along and hear it. And it feels like you reach that critical mass where if enough people are in the room, it's super vibey and then they want to tell their friends. That has been the dream for so long. And whether or not it continues to be like that, I'm going to savor every single moment of it. But I think it's reminding yourself that even if it's not always like that, it is still worth it. There's people who come and there's people that it impacts and it makes a difference. So I think...
You're going to live a life, Harry. You're going to live a life.
I mean, I always think if it affects one person, you're doing a great job.
But what was the question you wanted to ask Harry? Shall I remind you? Which is really funny because it's actually a question about remembering stuff. What was the question?
So, one of the things I wanted to ask was, have you got a method to remember some of the poems that you recite?
I think for me, as I'm writing it, I'm speaking it out loud, partly to get a sense of the rhythm of where the words are going, but also that then means that by the time I finish writing a poem, I have practiced it loads. And it amazes me how much of it is already almost in my head. And so like the first time I'm performing it, I'll have my notebook nearby or I'll read it off a piece of paper the first few times because I don't want to be so worried about forgetting it that I can't perform it. But I think for me, I don't know if it's the same for you, Mark, but the rhyming really helps. Once you're in a certain flow, you can almost feel the next line before you come to it. You don't have to think about it.
If I find a segment of a rhyming poem I can't remember, it's normally because I'm being led by the rhyme too much. It's a bit mushy, and I think I've probably just got to be saying something I actually want to say more. It's because the writing needs reworking a bit. I don't know if you find that or...
Yeah, and I found it interesting with these newer poems that aren't as sort of rigidly to a set rhyme scheme or structure. I've had to work out why one section goes to the next. And so the poem has to hold itself together enough that there's an obvious path for me to
I hadn't thought of that because I only rhyme. If I wasn't rhyming, I find it really scary and hard to remember how a poem went. You don't rhyme all the time.
I do a little bit. I like internal rhymes inside the actual sentence that I don't realise until the end. I would say the times that I've remembered poems, which is not very often because I'm lazy, let's be honest, is when I've set them to music. and I've made them into a song, and then I'm able to remember them a lot easier.
It's really interesting.
But I agree with you. I think it's the same in theatre and drama. It's actually the emotion of a sentence or what's behind it that makes people being able to remember them, I think. Yeah.
The other thing I find interesting, no matter how many times I practice it by myself, it's only once I've performed it once in front of an audience and remembered it, it's then locked in. And that almost...
That's brilliant.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's brilliant.
I'm the same. I can't remember it. Often I try and film with Jay and I can't remember it. We have to keep cutting. But then once I've got to the end, it's almost like I finished the last line of it and then I'm like, don't.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's so weird. Do you ever listen to yourself reciting it to learn?
I did that with my rap battles for a little while.
Yeah.
Because you only get one chance to perform that. And again, that was knowing it enough so that you're not spending your opponent's round thinking, how does my next bit go? So you can focus on what they're saying, so you can try and like rebuttal it. You have to like have it like deep in your bones.
Did rap battling make it easier to remember poems?
I think so, probably, yeah. Because I think when you've performed a poem enough, you learn where those laughter breaks are. And if they don't go the way you expect, it kind of throws you. Whereas with the rap battle, you can't anticipate how people are going to respond. Like you can hope and you can try and guide them in a certain way, but you have to know it enough so that you can sort of respond in that
trust your
moment.
judgment.
All right, for you then, Tony, could you paint something and you know it off by heart? Like a bicycle, for example. Would you need to look at a bicycle, or do you think you would?
If you practice something enough, you get to sort of know it. What I find, like say for example, over the years I've been doing lots of little mini canvases, and I paint robins and maybe kingfishers and certain things. So some of those things I can actually paint straight off, you know, because you've been doing it so much, you remember things.
That's better.
You know,
Poetry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm joking.
Tony Nero can paint. You can paint a kingfisher off by heart.
God.
That is such a banging.
I think I'm going to go home.
That's a superpower. That's awesome.
But do you know, like years ago, I had to look at references all the time. Had to have. I still use references because you're doing it regular all the time. You know, something sticks in your head.
People think writing the poem is putting the pen on the paper, but you can't. I think you're writing the poem all the time.
When I used to write my poems, most of that time was spent sat in front of the piece of paper, and it was really like working it out. Whereas now, most of that time is spent in my own head thinking about what it is I want to say, and then it's translated later on, and it's about that. And that's been a real shift. But I think that old me also used the craft of it as a crutch almost. I was like, I know that I can make this meticulous and clever. And so that's enough for this poem to be good without thinking, I don't actually know what I'm trying to say here. That will come later. I just need this framework, and then like the heart of it will appear. Whereas now I think I've become more sensitive to the world. So I've got so many things that I want to say, like bursting to come out, that actually those years of practice of getting good at getting stuff down, like it does happen quicker. But I think it's also trusting that if I spent 2 weeks on this, it wouldn't get any better because I'm saying exactly what it is that I want to say.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Love it.
Well, so if anybody is listening right now and going, oh, that Harry Baker sounds all right, maybe I'll give him a little bit of my time. How can people find you, Harry?
So my website is harrybaker.co.
Oh, although this comes out in mid-August, so the tour might be...
There we go.
Yeah.
Maybe done. But on Instagram and TikTok, it's just Harry Baker Poet. And I've got a mailing list, which is great because it doesn't rely on an algorithm. So if you want to sign up to that through Substack, you can find out about everything I'm up to.
We're ready to wrap up. So if you've enjoyed this episode and if you want to send us any work that's been inspired by this episode, any writing at all, send any WAV files to mark@wethepoets.com. And otherwise, I think we just want to say a huge thank you to Harry for coming in and Tony for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.
This episode of We the Poets was hosted by me, Mark Grist, Keely Mills and Tony Nero. We were very, very fortunate to have Harry Baker in the studio with us. We've got Chris Barn at Backland Studio making sure we all sound the best that we can. And this episode was made with public funding from Arts Council England. Thanks so much for listening.